Let's get straight to the point with views from both sides of the aisle. We now welcome back Austin Barber and Brandon Jones to our MPB studios. Austin is a Republican strategist and founder of the Clearwater Group. Brandon is an attorney and former Democratic member of the Mississippi House of Representatives. Gentlemen, welcome back to At Issue.
Thanks for having us
again. You ready for another one?
We are.
All right, well, the two big things, really, Medicaid and ed funding. So let's start with Medicaid. Since we last got together, Republican leadership in both chambers have provided some real vocal support for some level of expansion. They have different plans that they've kind of given us the ideas of. We haven't seen much nuts and bolts when it comes to the legislature. But what I find interesting right now is kind of how this is being framed from Republican leadership. A lot of emphasis on workforce, both the workforce piece that both leaders seem to want in there, but also this idea of framing Medicaid expansion as a way to keep the workforce healthy. So, Brandon, I'll start with you. Democrats have wanted just expansion cleanly for a long time, focusing on, obviously the rural health disparities. What do you take of this kind of Republican framing around workforce?
Yeah, well, I hope you guys will agree that I'm always there to support a good idea, even if I think it's way overdue. And I'm trying to do that this time. I mean, it is great that we are finally having a full discussion on Medicaid expansion. I think it's been the best thing we could do as a state for a long, long time from a policy position. But, let's, to your point a moment ago, let's be honest about where we stand. We're one of only 10 states throughout the country who haven't expanded. About half of our rural hospitals are threatened by closure if we don't do something about the uncompensated care piece of our healthcare system. And so Republicans have had 12 years of supermajorities to try something. It's way overdue. I do think the talk of let's study this, that's a little disingenuous. We're out over a decade since states throughout the country have started going this way. So I hope that we move expeditiously. But in terms of where do I stand on it being a topic of conversation and at the top of the list, I think it's a good thing for Mississippi and way overdue.
Austin, response to that?
Yeah, it's funny, man. You think some issue will never come up at the Capitol, and then you go, oh, it's coming up at the Capitol. And I sort of felt that way about Medicaid expansion, that I didn't think it would see any light. But here it is, and it is going to be seriously debated in both chambers. The Speaker and the Lieutenant Governor have said openly, we want to have this conversation. I think it's important to know a few things. One, we have not seen any legislation, unless something popped out this morning that I may have missed, that, those and people who are listening, a little bit of a process here. What the legislature does, both in the House and the Senate, those bills that are filed by individual members, they put it up online, but they have literally thousands of bills, and it takes a while to sort of get those through the process. So those bills have not popped up yet.
They have to be read, assigned a number, assigned committees.
It's a whole process. Yeah. So there are no tricks behind that. It just takes a while. There was some other bills that I was working on that I was waiting, and they popped up this morning. But we hadn't seen it. So you got to see what the details are in both chambers, and I'm sure they will have differences. Folks that I talked to who were conservative, they sort of have differing opinions on this. Gerard Gibert spoke yesterday, at a joint Public Health Committee, House and Senate yesterday. And I thought he said a lot of things that was really fascinating. And I think George's a pretty smart guy. And you would think, oh, this is a conservative talk show host who is, coming to talk to, joint session of public health. He didn't, I'm not going to say he said, yes, we must expand Medicaid, but he gave the reasons that a lot of people in my party think that we need to have this conversation, which is, and I'm sorry I'm going slow here, but I want to make sure Brandon understands what I'm saying. That's a joke. He's got a hat on today. He's looking dapper.
There's a filter. Huh?
Yeah, exactly. What Gerard said was, listen, there are folks who are out there who are working, whether they're single, married, single with kids, or they're married, who just aren't making much money. Okay, but they're trying, and either they can't afford an individual private insurance policy, or they can't get one because they're kind of, part-time job here, part-time job there, but they're also, they make too much money, which is not very hard, to not be eligible for Medicaid. So it's these folks that I have conversations with believe we really need to figure out these people who are out working. They're trying to make ends meet, and they just don't have the ability to find out to insurance policy. Insurance coverage, excuse me, because what I really worry about somebody, and we have a lot of time, so I can go here. I worry about the situation to where this theoretical family that I'm talking about, with a 35-year-old husband, 33-year-old wife, and maybe she's taking care of the two kids because they can't afford, daycare, and he's out doing the best he can. What happens if there's a serious healthcare issue with them? I don't want them to go bankrupt because they have no coverage. So those are the kinds of concerns that I think have sparked this conversation. And there are a lot of ways to do this that are not just a full expansion, but I think that is sort of why this conversation is happening right now about some of those kinds of people that I'm describing. Sorry to be long-winded, but that was important. Set it up.
Oh. Well, you've heard what he said. I mean, again, like this idea of really tying it to the ability to work. I mean, not just people needing a work requirement, as some leaders have proposed, but this idea is that we need people healthy so they can work, and kind of presenting Medicaid expansion in that vein.
Yeah, it's probably worth commenting that there is a great plan that's been introduced. House Democrats introduced a plan, and I think they were really smart about it. What they did was they said, we know that pure expansion is a non-starter for Mississippi Republicans in the legislature. And so actually not for Mississippians who have overwhelmingly said in polls they're in favor of it, but for legislative leadership. And so what they did was they kind of picked and chose from different plans to come in with something that kind of represented where the main line of American states are in terms of implementation. So there is a good go-by that exists, and I hope and I think that Lieutenant Governor Hoseman and Speaker White will take a look at that, because I think Robert Johnson and House Democrats did a good job. But this idea of work and marrying this to the health care issue is a little confusing, because if we want to be honest about where we are, it's really a health care issue. It's a people not getting preventative care, and it's how people end up having to get help whenever they're in crisis. And so what typically happens in Mississippi is they don't have a regular doctor. So they have to go to their emergency room. And the emergency room under Mississippi law has to treat them. The problem is, since that person doesn't have insurance, that becomes uncompensated care. So it creates a huge financial deficit for these hospitals. And that's really the whole crux of why these people are facing so much trouble keeping hospitals open in rural Mississippi. The other thing about working requirements is it's based on this assumption that people who receive benefits don't work, or that they have to be coerced into doing it. And that's really just not the case. I mean, people, by and large, try to work when they can. And frankly, in the one state, Arkansas, where they have a work requirement, that program has had some problems. You had 20,000 people who came off of Medicaid, because what happens is everybody on Medicaid right now has to prove that they're exempt from the work requirement. That requires a whole new administration that has to cut through the red tape and say, Michael, you're on Medicaid now. Can you prove to us your work status? They have to do that on a monthly basis. It's created a lot of bureaucratic headache and red tape. And so people have found themselves off. They found themselves off 1 month, on the next month. Administrators have said, this is a headache. We already know our current Department of Medicaid does not exactly love dealing with these types of issues. So I hope that they'll reconsider marrying this to that work requirement for those reasons, and look at it more as a health care requirement and health outcomes, and the fact that people need preventative care, and that we would have a healthier Mississippi for the moral and health reasons, but also for the economic
Austin,
reasons.
you look like you're itching to respond to that.
Well, no, I mean, candidly, what I would like to see, and who am I? But I'm a guy with a microphone in front of me right now, so I will say, and I think a lot of people would want to see this on my side. I'd love to see the people that I just described
right
have private insurance. I'd much rather see somebody with a I'm not going to say insurance, a particular insurance company, but with a private insurance policy versus versus being on Medicaid. Because listen, I know this. You have a better chance to get, particularly in a better healthcare situation with a private insurance policy than you do with a Medicaid insurance policy. That's just a fact. At least it's a fact in some of the things that I've experienced. So is that a situation to when we have all these exchanges that are out there as a way to expand that and, do some state and federal subsidies? I just think there's a lot of different ways that to solve this problem that we see as a problem. And I want to talk about the work thing in just a second. That I'm excited that this conversation will happen.
Can I ask a sincere question on that point? Isn't part of the conundrum we're in is that the private market hasn't satisfied the need? I mean, it's either priced itself out.
I don't know
for
Brandon.
People that don't make good money.
I don't
or
know.
enough money. I mean, and I don't know.
I don't know the answer to that. All I know is, this is sort of my theoretical opinion on this is I'd like to see more people with a private insurance policy, even if it was subsidized in some capacity by the state and federal government. And is that possible? I don't know.
Well, that sounds like the Affordable Care Act, and
Yeah, but I don't know. There's so many details about this, and what I'm confident is it's going to be it'll be thoroughly debated this session. But listen, our workforce participation rate, we have record unemployment. We do have a lot of people who are not in the workforce right now.
Right.
So you do hear that conversation that is tied in with this. And I understand what Brandon's saying. Hey, man, this ought to be about health care, making sure that people are going to the doctor, not waiting to go to the emergency room, for a spot on their back or their face or whatever it is because they didn't have health insurance. And ultimately, they're going to die because of that. Or, there's going to be some, $300,000 hospital bill because they stayed in the ER and in the hospital for a week. Can we get these people in 3 months earlier to go, oh, okay, let's just do this, and then we've saved a whole bunch of money there. So I hear you. This is about healthcare, but it's also about, listen, if we have healthier people, that means we may have more people who want to participate in the workforce. It's even kind of tied together, but I know what you're saying.
It's kind of a grim worldview. Let's all get healthy so we can go back to the quarry.
No, that's not right. It is no. If we are, this is not the quarry. This is not the Flintstones. It is. Hey, how do we get people out there trying to figure out what do I want to do with my life? What job do I want to go start and see if I can't find the success story that they want to find, and maybe they can't because they're sick right now, or they're halfway toward that success story and they have a healthcare issue.
You're about to say something. Go ahead and.
Well, I was wondering if we were going to talk about the process because I mentioned a moment ago House Democrats have this bill that's very detailed, and they've released an 11-point explainer. They've released a 3-point explainer.
Right.
They've done press on it. They've talked to leadership in the House about it. Lieutenant Governor Hosemann had a press conference on this Monday, or he spoke to the press on Monday about it. And the bill that's out there is simply one that brings forward the code sections.
Right.
So we have no details. And this
Right.
goes back to what I was saying a minute ago. We've had 12 years. I think we're all close observers of the legislative process in Mississippi, bless our hearts. But we've watched this process for a long time. And we keep seeing this pattern, Austin, of let's wait until the 11th hour and let's work out the details of this highly complex system under closed doors at a conference committee. What is the harm in going ahead and releasing your plan? Let rank and file members look at it. Let the representative from Forest General Hospital take a look at it. Let Delta Regional Senator take a look at it. Let Singing River Hospital's legislative leaders look at it so that we can all talk about these things. Let people get their hands on it so that we can produce the best product. I'm a little confused right now as to why we don't have a plan, and it's past. We're heading into March.
Yeah, well, I mean, you were a member of the legislature, and I don't think this is a new phenomenon of the legislature. But listen, we do have 75 days left in this session, and there will be thorough debate about this issue. And it may not be something that gets done this session. And you said, why? It's been 12 years. Well, we have a new Speaker of the House right now. okay? And we have a governor in his second term, and we have a lieutenant governor in his second term. The timing just may be right now to have this debate when it wasn't a year ago or 4 years ago or 10 years ago. But I'm confident that this thing will be thoroughly vetted and debated. And you know how this is, though, when you start working on something, and I know we got to pivot out of this, when you start working on something that's as leadership up there, that's a big issue, you have a lot of people coming to you with different ideas, and it's sometimes makes it more difficult to say, okay, here it is, here's the final plan, let's do this, because they want to listen and get input from folks all across the state.
Yeah, so that's kind of where I wanted to go. I mean, we're having the conversation. We have both chamber leaders at least talking about finding a path toward this, and we don't know the nuts and bolts because we've said the legislation that they're presenting isn't available yet. We haven't seen it, and to your point, some of it's just presenting code section, but is there an appetite to actually get this done this session? Or to your point, Austin, it's the first session of this term with a new speaker, a governor who has been against Medicaid expansion, came out this week,
he's still against it.
He's still against it. And so, is this one of those instances where, okay, this is the first session of this term. Do we get the conversation started and potentially not actually see anything come? Or, I mean,
I don't think so.
Is there actually an appetite to get things done despite the governor's kind of digging his heels in the sand against Medicaid?
I think legislative leadership in both sides are sincere with wanting to get something done this session. But, that doesn't mean they will. But there's no question that they are sincere about having this debate in both chambers this session, trying to get something done.
Well, then to that point, I mean, from what does that appetite translate into the votes needed, no matter what action the governor takes?
Got to see the bill, got to see the language, got to know what the details are.
Okay. Brandon, thoughts?
I've long suspected that if left to their own devices, the legislature would overwhelmingly vote in favor of this. If there was no party pressure, if there was no political if it was just, here's the policy idea and here's what it does. Because it's truly a no-brainer. I mean, we're splitting a lot of hairs here, but there's a reason that 40 of our 50 states have adopted it, and those 10 holdouts are pretty politically polarized. And it's worked like gangbusters. And all of those 40, there ain't a single one of those 40 that's out here trying to figure out how to give it back. They all like it. They've been doing it now for some of them a decade. And we're the ones that are kind of, well, how do we sell this to our partisan people? So I have suspected for a long time that if you took the guardrails off, you took the training wheels off, these people would vote in favor of it. I've suspected that goes for leadership as well. And I'm glad we have two legislative leaders in the House and Senate who seem to be moving in that direction. I hope they keep doing that. To your point about getting enough votes, Austin knows this. There was a time not too long ago that folks in that chamber, both chambers, used to love overriding the governor's veto. Didn't matter if it was in their party. Back in the 90s, I know Democrats that were in the House that loved overriding a Democratic governor's veto because it was more about what the legislative process meant rather than the partisan piece of it. Mm-hmm. We got away from that a little bit. We haven't done as much of that. But I think a little bit of that appetite is creeping up. I think you do have people who might be ready to say, we are the legislature. We have some strength, and we're not going to be dictated to by the governor.
You said we got away from that. There was some strong leadership that made that a little easier to get away.
Yeah.
He wasn't going. He was not going to lose those override vetoes.
Oh, no, that's right. I mean, I was going to say this. I feel like sometimes we say it too often. A certain fellow by the name of Haley Barbour kind of brought in a certain efficiency and strength to the process and a certain party orthodoxy that made that environment tougher. Now, I did vote to override, I think, 3 of Governor Barbour's vetoes.
You were over.
And I can't remember. I think we got it in the House, but it flunked in the Senate. Yeah. The Chinese toy bill, I really thought we had him on that one.
All right, well, we'll pivot on that note.
I didn't think we'd be talking about Chinese toy bills.
No, I didn't either.
There we go.
To the other big thing that's coming out this week in the session that's conversations over ed funding. Last term we saw a lot of different conversations regarding education funding, whether it was the MAEP formula last session, a couple sessions ago, investment in teacher pay raises. Well, that question's up again. And we don't have the nuts and bolts, but we at least seem to have kind of two schools of thought here in either chamber when it comes to how to address the ed funding. The Senate seems to be on a path to tinkering with the MAP formula to find a way to fully fund it. The House, through conversations with Speaker White, their plan right now is to scrap it and come up with something completely new that even has a portability piece. So you're in tune with the legislature, Austin. I mean, what are you hearing from both chambers, and what are they hoping to accomplish when it comes to ed funding?
Well, I should start with this. Republicans have led on education policy issues, at least for the last decade. This used to be an issue when Brandon was in the legislature that the Democrats just controlled. If you ask voters about who's got a better record on education, it was always Democrats. That has changed based on policy decisions that Republicans have made. And so I look at the decision by the House and the decisions by the Senate to have their own ideas as what they want to continue moving in a positive way towards making our schools better, our public schools better in Mississippi. Last year, I believe, the legislature funded our public schools at nearly, and it may have been, $3 billion. So there's not an issue with funding right now. There's not an issue with how much money the legislature and the governor are putting into public schools. I applaud the effort by both the House and the Senate to figure out what's the best way to make sure that these dollars get to these school districts, follow these kids, to make sure that we continue to raise our scores. Obviously, people who listen to this probably know this, our high school graduation rates are at record high. Our reading scores, our math scores, all these things that we measure are doing better now than they have in generations. So this is just another good debate, just like we just talked about on healthcare. This is a good debate on education funding. But there's no appetite to fund it at some lesser amount. Let's go cut education funding. I don't see anybody talking about that. That's not. It's like, what's the best way to do this?
It's what path to take, Brandon.
Well, I mean, there's a couple things Austin said that I find objectionable. One of them is that, Republicans have taken over this issue. There's not a single major education bill that's passed that hasn't been bipartisan. I mean, it's mostly a function of Republicans winning elections, not necessarily.
And I'm not trying to interrupt you, but you're right. It's bipartisan, but it's Republican leaders that are saying these are the things that we're going to do. Third grade reading gate, in charter schools, teacher pay raise. But you're right. A lot of those Democrats are voting yes for too.
And look, I'm grateful that our Republican overlords have not been as nutty as some of the people in Florida and Texas and some other states that have just done some odd things with their public education system. So I am grateful for that. When it comes to the formula, I don't think it's as sacrosanct as people might suspect with Democrats. I think there's a recognition that formulas need to be updated. The last time this one was tweaked was in '97. So I don't think you're going to find fear about looking at the formula. I think what you're going to find some trepidation about is let's make sure that we get the right bill. Let's make sure that we look at what does it truly cost to educate a student up to some proficiency standard that's objective. Let's get a fair statement of that. And then let's make sure we pay that bill every year. Whatever the cost is that gets us to a good level on educating a student, let's make sure we're paying that and doing it consistently. Because as you all know, the formula, like it, don't like it, we have failed our obligation to whatever that formula is really since it was passed. Yeah. I think it's been 3 times since it was passed that we've voted to fully fund it. And so we need to get to the point where we determine what that true cost is, and then we live up to that obligation.
Yeah, because I think when we talk about, you said no one wants to go in there and say, let's cut education. But I think from the outside, the perspective is we've had this formula for years that say you should fund it at X, and the legislature's been, no, we're going to fund it at this instead. So, I mean, the perception is it might not be that, that they're not spending money, or the amount, that gross amount of money that they're spending is negligible, but the public knows the lawmakers are not reaching what the current code says they should. So how do you resolve that?
I'd push back on you. The public doesn't. There's probably 3 people in the whole state of Mississippi who actually understand the MAEP formula.
But Boston, there was an initiative years ago put to the public, and the electorate turned out. So I think it might be a little unfair to say that the public doesn't know.
No, the public doesn't know how the MAEP formula works.
Fair.
What you're saying is there is a perception that the public has about whether they think public education is being funded at an appropriate level or not. Okay, I think that you're not taking a position on this, but my pushback would be, look at the results. Look at the dollars that are going into schools, and not every school is perfect. Of course not. There are a lot of schools that are still not at the level that they need to be. But look at the results. Look at the dollars that are going in, a record amount, from teacher pay raises to just general dollars that are going in, and then look at scores. Look at how the kids are performing better than they ever have. Okay. I think that's what the public knows. The vast majority of them, because they got kids or grandkids in the schools.
What is a bit of relief to me, and look, I do think it's worth noting that you have bipartisan interest in getting it right, and I do think it's sincere. Yeah. That's a big deal, because a lot of times you have these conversations and you're like, I don't think they're serious about this. I do think there are some sincere, supporters of public education that are over there helping to make some of these decisions. I think there are some challenges over there, but I think by and large people want to get this right, and I think they have a chance to do that so long as they follow that kind of idea towards what is equitable. What does it truly cost? Are we taking into account those increased factors that can drive up the cost of this, like poverty, special education, geography, people who are learning English as a second language, career and technical training? That has to be part of the mix here. And then teacher needs, because there are some places where we're having difficulty attracting teachers. So that has to be baked into this formula. And so long as those ingredients are in place, I think you could come out of this with the opportunity for bipartisan support for something that's meaningful. Well,
and we should, I'm going to name him, Dennis DeBar, who's the Senate Education Chairman from Leakesville down in southeast Mississippi. He's been Senate Chairman at least maybe his 5th session, maybe longer than that. He does care. He wants to do what's right. Rob Robertson from Starkville, Oktibbeha County, is the brand new Education Chairman in the House. And so he's
Richard Bennett before him.
Yeah,
I mean he clearly.
Yeah, and I'm sure for Rob, this is probably like drinking from a fire hose, because there's so many different aspects of education. But he and Speaker White, these are guys, and Lieutenant Governor, they care about this. They're trying to do this right. They want to make sure that they are funding teachers and students and administrative individuals at the best they possibly can, with the limited dollars that we have in the state of Mississippi.
So last question on this, and we'll try to be brief on it, but is this something that happens this session? I asked that about Medicaid. Is this something that happens this session, or is this just kind of getting the wheels turning?
What is this? What do you mean this?
Either a rewriting of MAEP or a complete scrap of MAEP and a new formula. Or, like we saw last year, the lawmakers don't have to do anything to the formula. They can fund however they choose to fund. But what the conversation we hear from Speaker White, and now what we're seeing coming out of the Senate Ed Committee, are these just mechanisms to get the conversation going, that maybe the second or third session of the term something happens? Or does this really have wheels to get done this session?
If we can get Austin to get us that online gaming bill, here's how you handicap it. This legislature has taken on a lot already. Speaking of online gaming, they've taken on restoration of voting rights.
Ballot
initiative. Medicaid expansion, which any one of those could consume a session if you're not careful. And as close observers of the legislature, we know our legislature historically is good at doing one thing, maybe 2 things, big, typically not 5. So I think no, MAEP will not be overhauled. I recall a short time ago the Senate hired a consultant, EdBuild, who came in, and even proponents of rewriting at that time said this would take a couple years. That's what they said. So, if you just take, and that's been a few years, so I'm not suggesting that things can't change, But if you just go back to the most recent time when we touched this, the suggestion was it would take some time to get it right. And we want to get it right. That's more important, I think, than moving fast
getting
on something
something
like
done.
this. So
Right.
I'm going to say no on that. I doubt it gets done this year.
What do you think?
I'm not into making predictions.
How
Except that Ole
lame.
Miss will win a national
Unbelievable.
championship. I don't know, man. There'll be a great debate.
Gosh,
Ask
take
us in
that.
30 days. So.
Asking in 30 days. All right. Well, in between now and then, we'll have plenty more to talk about, I'm sure. This has been At Issue on MPB Think Radio, a weekly discussion about the 2024 Mississippi legislative session. If you can't catch us live each Friday at 6:30, At Issue can be streamed on demand on MPB Public Media app, or you can subscribe to the At Issue podcast. Each week's podcast includes an extended version of our weekly interview, as well as an extended version of our roundtable discussion. And if you'd like to see what we all look like, the full interview and roundtable are available on YouTube. Just search Mississippi Public Broadcasting At Issue. I'm Michael Guidry from all of us at MPB. Thanks for listening.